She had looked at herself in the small, spotted mirror above the washstand and decided she looked precisely right. Not like herself. That was the point. Her hair was pinned too tightly, the way a woman pins her hair when she has no maid and no time and nothing to spare for vanity. Her dress was gray. She had bought it secondhand at a stall in the market 2 towns back, paying 3 shillings for something that had belonged to a woman twice her age. It smelled faintly of lavender and long patience. She had worn it for 2 days already, sleeping in it once, so that it would stop looking like a costume. She was 24 years old. She had a solicitor's letter in her coat pocket, a trunk at the coaching inn, and a plan that everyone who knew her would have called either very brave or very foolish. She had not told anyone. There was no one left to tell. The house was called Thornfield Grange. She had not seen it in 6 years, not since her father's funeral, when she had been 18 and had stood in the entrance hall in her black dress and watched her uncle receive condolences from men she had never met. Men who spoke to him as if he were the rightful heir and she were merely a fixture, like the portrait on the landing or the clock above the mantel. She had not understood then what was happening. She had been too young, too grieved, too certain that the law would simply see what was obvious, that Thornfield Grange belonged to her. Her name was in the will. She had read it herself. What she had not read, because she had not known to look for it, was the codicil her uncle had produced 3 weeks after the funeral. A secondary document, properly witnessed, properly dated, or so he had claimed. It had taken her 6 years to find out he had lied. The woman's name was Annette Thorpe, and she stood at the servants' entrance of Thornfield Grange, with her hands folded, and her face arranged into an expression of quiet, capable efficiency. That was what she had decided the night before at the inn. She would be Annette Thorpe. She would be efficient. She would be quiet. She would not look at the portrait in the entrance hall, and she would not think about the fact that the roses along the south wall had been planted by her mother. The housekeeper who answered the door was a stout woman with a ring of keys at her waist, and the expression almost someone who had been disappointed by human beings many times and expected to be disappointed again. "I was sent by the agency," Annette said. "I understand you're in need of a lady's companion." The housekeeper, Mrs. Tarbet. She introduced herself, looked her over with the practiced eye of a woman who had hired and dismissed a great many people. "Have you a character reference?" Annette produced the letter she had written herself. On paper she had aged carefully with tea and a warm iron, signed with a name she had borrowed from a woman 2 counties over, who owed her a favor and would not ask questions. Mrs. Tarbet read it. Her expression did not change. "The Dowager is particular," she said. "You'll be expected to read aloud in the evenings. She has weak eyes. You'll accompany her to the chapel on Sundays and to the village on Tuesdays. You will not gossip with the other staff. You will not receive callers. You will not have opinions about the household." "I understand," Annette said. "The current situation," Mrs. Tarbet said, lowering her voice very slightly, "is somewhat irregular. The estate is being managed by the Duke of Carwell while the legal question of inheritance is settled. His Grace arrived 3 weeks ago. He is," she paused. Present, Annette understood what she meant. He was not simply a name on a document. He was here, in the house, walking its corridors, sitting at its table, her father's table. "That is no concern of mine," Annette said. "I'm here for the Dowager." Mrs. Tarbet looked at her a moment longer, then stepped back from the door. "Come in, then." The Dowager Lady Thornfield was 71, tiny, and absolutely formidable. She was also, as far as Annette could tell within the first hour, almost entirely lucid, occasionally mischievous, and deeply bored by everyone around her. She received Annette in her sitting room, which smelled of beeswax and old books and the particular warmth of a fire kept burning even in late spring. She was seated in a high-backed chair near the window, wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth, and she looked at Annette the way a woman looks at something she is deciding whether to bother with. "You're younger than I expected," she said. "The agency felt I was suitable," Annette said. "The agency," Lady Thornfield said with the faint contempt of someone who had outlived several agencies, "sends me what's left over. Sit down." Annette sat. "Read me something," Lady Thornfield said, gesturing to the book on the table beside her. "Not from the beginning. Open it somewhere in the middle and read. I want to hear your voice, not your manners." Annette picked up the book. It was a collection of letters. She did not know the author, and she opened it to a page somewhere in the third section and read. She read for 4 minutes without being stopped. "You'll do," Lady Thornfield said. "Don't try to please me. I find it exhausting. Just be useful." It was the most encouraging thing anyone had said to her in months. She had been at Thornfield Grange for 3 days before she saw the Duke. She had heard him. Boots on the flagstone in the corridor below her window, a voice in the entrance hall, giving quiet instructions to the steward. But she had managed to arrange her movements so that they did not coincide with his. This was deliberate. She needed time. Time to remember every corner of the house, every staircase, every room she had known as a child, without anyone watching her face as she remembered. She needed time to find the document her solicitor believed existed. A letter written by her father in the last year of his life, in which he had apparently expressed doubts about the codicil's legitimacy. The solicitor had found a reference to it in another correspondence, a single mention, almost offhand. It might mean nothing. It might mean everything. It was in the house somewhere. She was certain of it. She was in the library on the 4th morning, standing on the stepladder to reach the upper shelves, when the door opened. She did not look down immediately. She had learned already that servants who looked up too quickly made people nervous. "I was not told anyone was in here." She looked down. He was tall, taller than she had expected, though she did not know what she had expected, and young. She had imagined the Duke of Carwell as something like her uncle, older, self-satisfied, entirely comfortable with the machinery of advantage. This man was perhaps 30, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if he were not currently looking at her with an expression of mild but genuine puzzlement. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she said. She came down the ladder carefully, holding the book she had retrieved. "Mrs. Tarbet asked me to locate a particular volume for Thornfield. I did not realize the library was in use." He looked at the book in her hands. "That's not it," he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The book Lady Thornfield wants. It's the one on the 3rd shelf, left of the window. The one with the red spine." He paused. "She asks for it every 3 weeks. The household has been finding it for her for as long as anyone can remember." Annette looked at the shelf. There it was. Red spine, exactly where he had said. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, then moved toward the desk. He was carrying a leather portfolio, and he opened it without looking at her again. The conversation, apparently, was finished. She took the red-spined book and left. She had reached the door when he spoke again. "Miss." She turned. "What is your name?" "Thorpe," she said. "Annette Thorpe." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not quite read, and then he nodded again. "Miss Thorpe," he said, and returned to his papers. The thing she had not expected was that the house would feel like grief. She had thought it would feel like anger. She had been angry for so long that she had assumed the anger was simply part of her now, the way a scar is part of the skin. But walking the corridors of Thornfield Grange in the early mornings, before the household woke, she had always been an early riser. Her father had teased her for it. She felt something quieter and worse. The house remembered her even if it did not know her. The 3rd stair still creaked in the same place. The window at the end of the east corridor still stuck in its frame and had to be coaxed open with both hands. The kitchen garden still grew in the pattern her mother had planned. the same arrangement of herbs that had been there as long as she could remember. She found herself standing in the kitchen garden one morning before breakfast, her hands at her sides, simply looking at it. The mint had spread. Someone had replanted the rosemary. Everything else was exactly as it had been. "You're up early." She turned. The Duke was standing at the garden gate, already dressed, a cup of something in his hand. He did not look surprised to see her, which suggested he had perhaps been watching for a moment before he spoke. "I often am," she said. He looked at the garden. "Did you know this layout is unusual? The kitchen gardens on most estates of this size are purely functional. This one was designed. Someone cared about it." "Yes," Annette said carefully. "It does seem that way." He looked at her. "Did Mrs. Tarbet tell you the history of the estate?" "Very little." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, the family that owned it, the Devanes, had the estate for nearly a century. The last owner died without a male heir. The title passed. The house became complicated." He paused. "I did not seek this appointment. I want you to know that. I was asked to serve as trustee while the legal matter is resolved." Annette said nothing. "The resolution," he said, "is taking longer than anticipated." She thought of the letter her solicitor had found. The reference. The letter that might exist in this house, in a desk or a trunk, or tucked into the back of a book. That might be the difference between everything and nothing. "I am sure," she said evenly, "that it will be resolved in time." He looked at her again with that unreadable expression, and then he lifted his cup in a small acknowledging gesture and walked back toward the house. She stood in the kitchen garden until she was sure her face was composed, and then she followed. The woman who arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of Annette's time at Thornfield Grange was called Miss Opaline Vass, and she was everything Annette was not. She was 22, possessed of striking dark eyes and an absolute certainty in her own consequence. She arrived in a carriage with her mother, a woman of tremendous hats and relentless determination, and she moved through the entrance hall of Thornfield Grange the way a person moves through a space they have already decided is theirs. Annette watched from the upper landing. Mrs. Tarbet had mentioned carefully that the Duke had been in correspondence with the Dowager Duchess of Carwell, his mother, on the subject of marriage, that Miss Vass had been staying with family in the county, that this was not precisely an accident. Miss Vass was, in public, charming. She smiled at Lady Thornfield. She complimented the house. She spoke to the Duke with a sort of careful brightness that suggested she had rehearsed for this particular performance. In private, she was something different. Annette discovered this on the second day, when she was sent to the guest corridor with fresh linens. She heard Miss Vass before she reached the room. A voice through the partially closed door, low and irritated. "Doesn't know her place. The little one with the gray dress. She looked directly at me in the corridor." Annette stopped. "A companion," Miss Vass's mother said, from somewhere deeper in the room. "Hired staff, Opaline, I know what she is. I'm saying she looked at me as if she had the right to." There was a pause. "You're imagining things." "I'm not," Miss Vass said. "Some people can simply tell, Mother. Some people carry their breeding with them and cannot hide it, even in gray wool." Annette stood in the corridor for a moment with the linens in her arms. Then she continued to the linen cupboard and put them away and went back downstairs. She had been looked through, talked over, and dismissed by women like Miss Vass's mother since her father's death. She had learned, in 6 years, that there was nothing to be gained by reacting. The house, she reminded herself, was the point. The letter was the point. She was here for a reason that had nothing to do with Opaline Vass. But the words stayed with her. Some people carry their breeding with them and cannot hide it. She had been trying so hard to hide it. Perhaps, she thought, she had not tried hard enough. She found the first useful thing 3 days later. It was not the letter. It was something smaller. A ledger entry in the estate accounts. A single line in a column of figures, dated 2 months before her father's death. A payment to a firm of solicitors she did not recognize in a city 3 hours' ride away. The amount was not large. The notation beside it was simply, "Correspondence, re-primary document." She copied it carefully, word for word, on a small piece of paper she tucked into her boot. That evening, she wrote to her solicitor in a code they had agreed on, letters placed precisely, a pattern that looked, to anyone who did not know it, like a perfectly ordinary letter from a woman to a cousin. She mentioned the firm's name. She asked him to inquire. She posted it herself on Tuesday, when she accompanied Lady Thornfield to the village. The Duke had taken to walking in the kitchen garden in the early morning. She did not know if this was a habit he had brought with him, or one that had developed since her arrival. She told herself it did not matter. She adjusted her own timing to avoid coinciding with his, and mostly it worked. Mostly. Miss Thorpe. She had been kneeling by the far wall, cutting back the old lavender with a small pair of garden shears she had found in the potting shed. She had told herself she was simply passing time. She had believed herself. She stood. "Your Grace." He looked at the lavender. He looked at the shears. He looked at her. "Do you garden?" "A little," she said. "I noticed the lavender needed attention." "It did," he said. He stood at a distance that was, she thought, precisely calibrated. Close enough to be conversational, far enough to be appropriate. He was a careful man. She was beginning to understand. He moved through the world with a kind of deliberate attention, as if he had learned early that carelessness had consequences. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Where are you from, originally?" The question was asked quietly, without accusation, and yet she felt it settle against her like pressure. "Yorkshire," she said. It was true. It was also the only true thing about Annette Thorpe. "I thought so," he said. "There's something in the way you speak." The vowels. He paused. "I grew up in the north as well. Not Yorkshire, further west." She looked at him. He was not looking at the lavender anymore. "Miss Thorpe," he said, "may I ask how you came to be placed at an estate in this county when you are from the north?" "Opportunities arose," she said. "One follows them where they lead." He considered this. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I suppose that's true for most of us." He stayed another minute looking at the garden, and then he went back inside. She waited until the door had closed behind him before she allowed herself to breathe carefully. He was beginning to notice things. She did not know what to do about that. The crisis came on a Wednesday. Miss Vesey had decided that morning that she wished to ride. She had brought her own horse, a pale animal called something Annette did not catch, and she had ridden out with the Duke and one of the grooms. They had returned 2 hours later, and Miss Voss had come in, flushed and animated, and trailing her riding gloves, and the Duke had been. Annette had watched from the window, correct, polite, attentive in the way a man is attentive when he is paying attention to something else. That was not the crisis. The crisis was at luncheon, which Annette did not attend. She ate with Mrs. Tarbet in the housekeeper's room, but heard about afterward from Peggy, the youngest housemaid, who had been serving at table, and who had very bright eyes and an excellent memory. "Miss Vass," Peggy said, sorting napkins with intense concentration, told the Duke that the companion had been seen going through the estate papers. "In the library." Annette kept her expression still. "Did she say what papers?" "The account ledgers, miss. She said it was not appropriate, a hired companion going through the household accounts." Annette had, in fact, been through the account ledgers. She had done it carefully, over 3 separate evenings, always returning everything to its exact position. "What did His Grace say?" she asked. Peggy's expression was complex. "He said he was sure there was a reasonable explanation and that he would look into it." That afternoon, Mrs. Tarbet found her in the corridor and told her, with the compressed regret of a woman delivering uncomfortable news, that the Duke wished to speak with her. He was in the library, standing at the window. He turned when she came in. He did not tell her to sit. She did not sit. "Miss Thorpe," he said, "I have been told that you were seen going through the estate ledgers." "I was," she said. He had, she thought, not expected that. Most people, when confronted, retreated immediately into denial. She had decided, on the walk down the corridor, that she would not. "May I ask why?" "I was curious," she said. "I apologize if that was overstepping. I find household accounts interesting. I always have." She paused. "I grew up in a house where such things were discussed as openly. My father believed that a woman who understood the accounts of a household understood the household itself." It was all true. It was the most true thing she had said in 2 weeks. He looked at her for a long moment. "What did you find interesting?" he said. "The kitchen garden expenditures," she said. "They're unusually low for an estate of this size. Whoever manages the kitchen garden is very efficient." She paused. "Or whoever planted it originally knew exactly what they were doing, and the planning has simply outlasted the planner." Something in his face changed. Not much. He was not a man who showed things easily, but something. "That is a perceptive observation," he said. "I'm sorry if I gave offense," she said. "I won't do it again." She turned to go. "Miss Thorpe." She stopped. "The house," he said, "has been in legal uncertainty for 6 years. The family that held it, the Devanes, left a will that was subsequently challenged. I am here to manage the estate while the matter is settled by the courts." He paused. "The outcome, when it comes, will be correct. I want you to know that. Whatever I believe is just, that is what I intend to ensure." She looked at him. She could not have said what was in her face. She hoped it was nothing readable. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, and left. She walked to her room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without moving. Whatever he believed was just. He had said that. He had said it to a woman he thought was a hired companion, with no reason to say it except that it was what he believed. She had come to Thornfield Grange expecting to find an obstacle. She was beginning to wonder if she had found something else entirely. The solicitor's reply came on a Friday, tucked inside a letter that looked, to any casual observer, like a response to an inquiry about a family recipe. The firm her father had paid existed. It had been a small practice, now dissolved, but its records had passed to an archive. Her solicitor had contacted the archive. He had made inquiries. He had been told that among the uncatalogued materials was a collection of correspondence related to an estate matter in the north, a challenge to a codicil, and that one item in the collection appeared to be an original letter from the testator himself. Her father had written it. It existed. It was not at Thornfield Grange. It was in an archive 2 counties away. It could be retrieved, with the proper authorization, within a fortnight. She read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the same place she kept the paper with the ledger notation, and she sat very still for a long while. It was over. Not today. There were still steps, still legal processes, still the careful machinery of courts and claims. But the thing her uncle had hidden was going to come into the light. Her father's own words, in his own hand, doubting the very document her uncle had used to take everything from her. She pressed her palms against her knees and breathed. She told Lady Thornfield that evening, not everything, but enough. They were alone. They were always alone in the evenings. It was the reason Annette had come. And the old woman was listening to her read, or rather half listening, in the way she often did when she was thinking about something else. Annette read 3 paragraphs and then stopped. "Lady Thornfield," she said, "I have a confession to make." The Dowager looked at her without surprise. "I know," she said. Annette went very still. "You have her eyes," Lady Thornfield said. "Her mother's eyes. I knew Charlotte Devane for 30 years. You have her exact eyes." She said it simply, the way one states a fact that has always been known. "I wondered when you would tell me." Annette was silent for a long moment. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because," Lady Thornfield said, "you were not ready, and because—" She settled her shawl with the precision of a woman who has strong opinions about shawls. "I wanted to see what you would do. Whether you would simply wait and endure, or whether you would do something about it." "I did something about it," Annette said. "Yes," the old woman said. "I rather thought you had." She was quiet for a moment. "My nephew is not a bad man." "No," Annette said carefully, "I don't believe he is." Lady Thornfield looked at her with an expression that was, if Annette had to name it, satisfaction. "He doesn't know," she said. "He was given the trusteeship in good faith. He has managed the estate in good faith. He believes the legal matter is simply a complication of inheritance law." She paused. "He does not know about the codicil." "He will," Annette said. "When the documents are produced, he will know everything." Lady Thornfield was quiet. The fire crackled. "Will you stay?" the old woman asked. "When this is settled. Will you stay here in this house?" Annette looked at the window. Outside, in the dark, the kitchen garden was invisible, but she knew exactly where it was. Knew the line of the old lavender, and the spread of the mint and the shape of the rosemary her mother had planted in the pattern she had once described from memory to a woman in a small room 2 counties away who had listened without understanding why it mattered. "This is my home," Annette said. "Yes, I'll stay." The letter arrived for the Duke 3 days later. She did not see it arrive. She heard about it, later, from Mrs. Tarbet, who had heard it from the steward, who had been in the Duke's study when the Duke had read it. The Duke had gone very quiet, the steward said. He had read it twice. He had then asked to be left alone. He found her in the kitchen garden that afternoon. She had known he would. She had not gone anywhere else, had waited in the one place she was most herself, her hands among the lavender, the smell of it sharp and clean in the late spring air. He came through the gate and stood a few feet away and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Something that had been controlled had, she thought, let go. "Miss Thorpe," he said, and then, "I don't think that's your name." "No," she said. She stood and faced him, her hands at her sides. "It isn't. You're Marguerite Devane," he said. "The daughter of Robert Devane, the true heir to this estate, yes." He was quiet for a very long moment. "The codicil," he said. "The document your uncle produced. Your father challenged it himself in writing in the last year of his life. He questioned its authenticity. That letter was in the possession of a solicitor's firm that your uncle apparently ought not know about." He stopped, or did not think to look for. "My solicitor found it," she said. He looked at her. "You knew, when you came here. You already knew. I knew there was a letter. I did not yet have it, but you came here anyway. I needed access," she said, "to the records. To understand the full extent of what had been done." She held his gaze, and I needed to see it again, the house. I needed to see if what I remembered was real, or if I had built it into something it wasn't. "And," he said, "it's exactly what I remembered," she said. "It's exactly what my father built, what my mother planned. It is entirely, completely real." He looked away then. He looked at the kitchen garden, the lavender, the rosemary, the mint that had spread beyond its original boundary, the pattern that had survived 6 years of other people's management because it had been planted with such deliberate care. "I was given this appointment," he said, "because I was told the estate was in legal limbo, uncomplicated, a matter of paperwork." He paused. "I was not told that the heir was alive and had been deliberately excluded." "You didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't." "How?" he said, and the word was quiet but genuine. "Because," she said, "you told a woman you thought was hired staff that whatever you believed was just, that was what you intended to ensure." She paused. "People don't say things like that to housemaids if they're not sincere." He looked at her. Something in his face was, not broken exactly, rearranged. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said. You were used by my uncle as much as I was, only differently. I was, he said, and I intend to rectify that. He looked at the house, its stone pale in the afternoon light, its windows catching the late sun. The document your solicitor retrieved, combined with your testimony and the estate records, will be enough to challenge the codicil formally. The estate will revert. It should take 6 weeks, perhaps 8. He paused. You should remain here during that time, as yourself. In your own house. I have been in my own house, she said, just not as myself. He looked at her then, and for the first time since she had come to Thornfield Grange, there was nothing measured in his expression. He looked at her the way a man looks when he has understood something for the first time, and found that he minds it a great deal more than he expected. Miss Devane, he said. Marguerite. She had not heard her own name in 2 months. It landed differently than she expected. Your Grace, she said. I think, he said, after a moment, that you might call me something other than that. Given the circumstances, she considered him. His name, she knew from documents and household correspondence, was Crispin. She nearly startled, then realized that name was in the file. She reached for his proper name. His name was Aldwin. Aldwin Carwell. Aldwin, she said quietly, trying it. Yes, he said. That. Miss Vass departed on a Friday, with her mother and her pale horse and her excellent hats. She departed in a carriage that Annette, Marguerite, watched from the window of the east corridor, the window that still stuck in its frame and had to be coaxed open with both hands. Miss Vass did not look up as she went. The Dowager Lady Thornfield said, when told of the departure, Good. She was not suited to this house. And when asked what she meant by that, she said only, some houses require a particular temperament. This one always has. The legal proceedings took 7 weeks. Marguerite was present for each of them, accompanied by her solicitor, and, on 3 occasions, by the Duke himself, who appeared in his capacity as trustee and gave testimony that was, in the words of the presiding solicitor, clear, comprehensive, and unambiguous. Her uncle did not attend. He sent a representative, who withdrew on the 3rd day. On a Thursday morning in late summer, the court issued its ruling. The codicil was found to be fraudulent. The estate of Thornfield Grange reverted to its rightful heir. Her solicitor shook her hand. He was trying, she thought, not to look too pleased with himself, and failing. She drove back to Thornfield Grange in the afternoon, and when the carriage came around the last turn in the lane and the house appeared, stone and glass, and the south wall thick with roses, she felt something release in her chest that she had been holding for 6 years. Not anger, not grief, something that had been held in tension, waiting, and was now allowed to stop. He was standing at the gate. She had not told him what time she would arrive, but he was there. She got down from the carriage without waiting for the step to be placed. She walked toward him, and he walked toward her, and they met at the gate. Well, he said. It's mine, she said. His expression was the one she had first seen that afternoon in the library, something rearranged, something that had let go, but warmer now, less careful. It was always yours, he said. She looked at the house. The roses along the south wall were in full bloom, exactly as her mother had planted them. The kitchen garden was beyond the west corner, out of sight but precisely where she knew it to be. The portrait was in the east corridor, a woman with her mother's eyes looking out at whoever passed with an expression that was patient and entirely certain. She looked back at him. She had come to Thornfield Grange to retrieve what had been taken from her. She had not expected anything else. She was not certain, still, what else she had found. Only that it was something she had not been looking for, and that it was, in its own way, exactly right. The house was hers. The garden was hers. The roses were hers. And the man standing at her gate, looking at her as if she were the most interesting thing in the county of Yorkshire, was, she thought, beginning to be something too. She would let that unfold as it wished. She had learned in 7 weeks and 6 years that the things worth having were rarely hurried. She walked through the gate, and the house received her the way a house receives someone who has always belonged to it. Quietly, without ceremony, as if she had simply been away for a while, and had now, at last, come home.